The year was 1899, and the city of Chicago was a roaring beast of steel and smoke, where dreams were forged in the fires of industry and broken beneath the weight of coal dust. On the south side, where the smell of sweat and soot lingered in the air, Margaret Sullivan stood at the window of her small apartment, her hands pressed against the glass, as she watched her husband, Thomas, disappear into the morning fog. For 3 years, Thomas had worked at the Consolidated Coal Company's mine, descending daily into the earth's dark belly, carving out a future for his family with every shovelful of coal. Margaret, 5 months pregnant, had learned to mask her fear behind routine questions and quiet prayers, but deep down, she knew the dangers that waited below. That morning, Thomas kissed her gently, his hands rough from labor but his eyes soft with love. He adjusted his canvas jacket, took the lunch pail she had prepared, and promised, as he did every day, that he would come home. Margaret nodded, forcing a smile, but her heart ached with a premonition she could not explain. As Thomas walked down the street, joining a stream of men heading toward the mine, Margaret whispered a prayer to the heavens, begging for his safe return. The Consolidated Coal Company's mine was a place of relentless toil, where men labored in darkness, breathing air thick with dust and danger. Thomas worked alongside men from all corners of the world, Polish, Italian, German, united by the promise of wages and the shared dread of the earth's unpredictable wrath. The tunnels were low, forcing miners to stoop as they shoveled coal into carts, their backs aching with every movement. The air was stale and heavy, and the only light came from flickering lanterns that cast long shadows on the walls. Explosive gases lurked beneath the surface, and the constant threat of collapse loomed over every shift. On that fateful October day, Thomas descended into the mine with 23 other men. The morning had been routine, no unusual tremors, no strange smells. But as the hours passed, the miners worked deeper, their picks biting into the earth. Suddenly, a deafening roar echoed through the tunnels. The roof above Thomas and his crew gave way, burying them beneath tons of rock and coal. The mine erupted in chaos. Men screamed, lanterns flickered and died, and dust filled the air, choking those still alive. Above ground, the world seemed to hold its breath. No one knew what had happened below, but the silence that followed was more terrifying than any sound. Margaret waited at home, her nerves frayed with each passing hour. When night fell and Thomas still hadn't returned, she rushed to the mine entrance, only to find a crowd of anxious wives and mothers. The mine foreman stood before them, his face grim. There had been a collapse, he said. 24 men were trapped. No one knew if they were alive. Margaret collapsed to her knees, her world shattering with each word. She prayed harder than she ever had, begging God to bring Thomas back to her. Days turned into weeks, then months. The mine was sealed, and rescue efforts ceased. The families were told their loved ones were gone. Margaret refused to accept it. She prayed every night, lighting candles and whispering Thomas's name, clinging to the hope that he might somehow survive. She raised their child alone, working as a seamstress to make ends meet. The years passed, and Margaret grew older, but her faith never wavered. She waited for Thomas, even as the world moved on without him. Then on a humid August afternoon in 1919, Margaret opened her front door to find a grey-haired man with haunted eyes standing on her porch. He looked nothing like the man she remembered, but something in his gaze stirred a memory buried deep within her. The man introduced himself as Mr. Callahan, the boss of the Consolidated Coal Company. He had come to deliver news that would change Margaret's life forever. Mr. Callahan's presence was like a storm cloud over Margaret's quiet life. He stood on her doorstep, his suit worn but respectable, his eyes heavy with the weight of years and secrets. Margaret's heart pounded as she invited him in, her hands trembling. She had not seen anyone from the mine since that terrible day in 1899, and the sight of a man connected to her past brought a flood of emotions she thought she had buried. Callahan sat at her kitchen table, removing his hat and placing it beside him. He looked around the room, noting the photographs on the walls, images of a life lived without Thomas. Margaret offered tea, her voice barely above a whisper. Callahan accepted, but his eyes never left hers. He cleared his throat and began to speak, each word measured and deliberate. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, "I come to you with news about your husband. I know it has been 20 years and I know you have suffered in silence, but what I am about to tell you is something I have carried with me all this time." Margaret's breath caught in her throat. She braced herself for the worst, for confirmation that Thomas was truly gone. But Callahan's next words stunned her. "Thomas Sullivan did not die in the mine collapse," he said. "He survived." Margaret's mind reeled. She stared at Callahan, unable to comprehend what he was saying. Survived? How? Where has he been all these years? Callahan leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. When the roof collapsed, Thomas and 3 others managed to escape through a side tunnel. They were trapped for days, but eventually found a way out. By the time they reached the surface, the mine had been sealed. No one knew they were alive. The company assumed they were dead. Margaret's hands flew to her mouth. "But why didn't he come home? Why didn't he find me?" Callahan hesitated, his expression pained. Thomas was badly injured. He lost his memory. He didn't know who he was or where he came from. When he was found, he was taken to a hospital in another city. By the time he recovered, he had no way to trace his past. He started a new life, married another woman, and raised a family. Margaret felt the room spin. She sank into her chair, her heart breaking anew. "He forgot me. He forgot our child." Callahan nodded solemnly. "He did. I only learned the truth recently, when I was going through old company records. I saw his name and realized who he was. I tracked down his family and learned that Thomas passed away last year. He never knew you were waiting for him." Tears streamed down Margaret's face. All those years of prayer, all that hope had been for nothing. She had lived a life of waiting, only to learn that Thomas had lived another life, unaware of the family he left behind. Callahan reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small envelope. "Thomas left this for you. He asked that it be delivered if anyone ever came looking for him." Margaret took the envelope with trembling hands. She opened it carefully, pulling out a folded letter and a faded photograph. The letter was written in Thomas's handwriting, shaky but unmistakable. The photograph showed a man who looked like Thomas, older and grayer, standing beside a woman and 2 children. Margaret read the letter, her tears blurring the words. "I am sorry, Maggie," Thomas wrote. "If I had known I would have come home. I hope you found happiness. I never forgot you, even if I didn't remember." Margaret clutched the letter to her chest, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. She had waited for Thomas for 20 years, and now she knew the truth. It was a truth that brought pain, but also closure. Margaret spent the next days in a daze, her mind torn between grief and relief. The letter from Thomas was both a comfort and a wound, a testament to a love that had endured even when memory failed. She showed the photograph and letter to her grown son, Daniel, who listened with wide eyes as she recounted the story of his father's survival and lost years. Daniel, now a young man with a family of his own, was stunned. "He was alive all that time?" he asked. "And he didn't know about me?" Margaret nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "He didn't know, Daniel. He started a new life, and I raised you alone. But now we know the truth." Daniel hugged his mother, holding her close. "I'm sorry, Ma. I wish he could have known us." Margaret smiled through her tears. "Me too. But at least we have this letter. At least we know he loved us, even if he couldn't remember." As the days passed, Margaret found herself drawn to the letter, reading it over and over. She began to piece together the fragments of Thomas's life, imagining the man he had become in those lost years. She wondered about the woman he married, the children he raised, and the life he built far from Chicago. One afternoon, Margaret decided to write a reply. She sat at her kitchen table, pen in hand, and poured her heart onto the page. She told Thomas about Daniel, about the life they had built, and about the prayers she had whispered every night. She wrote of her love, her loss, and her forgiveness. When she finished, she placed the letter in an envelope and sealed it, unsure of what to do with it. Then an idea came to her. She would send the letter to Thomas's family to let them know that their father had been loved and remembered. She found the address Callahan had given her and mailed the letter, her heart heavy with hope. Weeks passed, and Margaret waited for a response. She continued her daily routine, but her mind was never far from Thomas and the life they might have had. She visited the cemetery where Thomas's name was inscribed on a memorial, lighting a candle and saying a prayer. One morning, a letter arrived. Margaret's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a note from Thomas's widow, thanking Margaret for her words and sharing stories of Thomas's life in his later years. She wrote of his kindness, his love for his family, and his quiet longing for something he could not name. Margaret read the letter with tears in her eyes. She felt a connection to Thomas's new family, a bond forged by shared loss and love. She wrote back, sharing her own memories and expressing her gratitude for their kindness. Through their letters, Margaret found a sense of peace. She realized that Thomas had lived a full life, even if it was not the life she had imagined. She had waited for him, prayed for him, and now she could let go, knowing that he had been loved in two different worlds. Margaret's life settled into a new rhythm. She continued to raise her family, but now she carried the weight of Thomas's story with her. She shared it with Daniel and his children, passing down the tale of a love that had endured through time and loss. The letters from Thomas's family became a bridge between two worlds, connecting Margaret to the life Thomas had built far from Chicago. One summer, Margaret decided to visit Thomas's grave. She traveled to the small town where he had lived, accompanied by Daniel and his family. The journey was long, but Margaret felt a sense of purpose with each mile. When they arrived, they found a simple headstone marked with Thomas's name and the years of his life. Margaret placed a bouquet of flowers on the grave, her heart heavy with emotion. She knelt beside the stone, whispering a prayer for Thomas and for the life they might have had. Daniel stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. As they stood in silence, a woman approached. She introduced herself as Thomas's widow, her eyes filled with recognition and sorrow. The two women embraced, sharing a moment of understanding and grief. Margaret told Thomas's widow about their life in Chicago, about the years of waiting and prayer. The widow shared stories of Thomas's kindness, his love for his family, and the quiet longing he had carried with him. They talked for hours, finding comfort in their shared connection to Thomas. Before they parted, Margaret handed the widow a small box. Inside was the photograph Thomas had left for her, a token of the love that had endured through time. The widow took the box with tears in her eyes, promising to keep it safe. Margaret returned to Chicago with a sense of closure. She had waited for Thomas for 20 years, and now she could let go, knowing that he had been loved and remembered. She continued to live her life, cherishing the memories of Thomas and the love that had shaped her world. Years passed, and Margaret's story became a legend in her family. Her children and grandchildren told the tale of the miner's wife who had prayed for her husband's return, and of the boss who brought her the truth 20 years later. The story was a testament to love, loss, and the enduring power of hope. The years after Margaret's visit to Thomas's grave passed quietly, but the echoes of his story continued to shape her life. The connection she had forged with Thomas's widow and their families brought a sense of peace, but also a renewed curiosity about the man he had become. Margaret found herself drawn to the history of the Consolidated Coal Company, eager to learn more about the world Thomas had lived in during those lost years. She began visiting the local library, poring over old newspapers and company records. The stories she uncovered painted a picture of hardship and resilience. The Chicago coal mines of the late 19th and early 20th centuries were places of constant danger, where accidents were tragically common. Explosions, collapses, and toxic gases claimed the lives of countless miners, leaving families shattered and communities grieving. Margaret read about strikes and labor disputes, about the fight for safer working conditions and fair wages. She learned of the camaraderie among miners, the bonds forged in the darkness beneath the earth. One afternoon, Margaret stumbled upon an old photograph in a newspaper archive. It showed a group of miners standing at the entrance of the Consolidated Coal Company mine, their faces weathered but proud. Among them, she recognized Thomas. He stood at the edge of the group, his eyes fixed on the camera with a quiet determination. Margaret's heart ached as she stared at the image, imagining the life he had lived before the collapse. She continued her research, piecing together fragments of Thomas's story. She learned about the mine collapse that had trapped him and his crew, the desperate attempts at rescue, and the decision to seal the mine. She read about the survivors who had escaped through side tunnels, only to be lost in the chaos above ground. The more she learned, the more she understood the weight of Thomas's loss, not just to her, but to the entire community. Margaret decided to share her findings with her family. She organized a gathering at her home, inviting her children and grandchildren. She showed them the photograph and told them the stories she had uncovered. She spoke of Thomas's courage, his resilience, and the love that had endured even in the face of tragedy. Her family listened with rapt attention, their hearts touched by the tale of a man who had lived through unimaginable hardship. As the evening drew to a close, Margaret felt a sense of fulfillment. She had honored Thomas's memory, not just through her prayers and letters, but through her determination to keep his story alive. She knew that his legacy would live on in the hearts of her family, a testament to the enduring power of love and hope. Margaret's research also led her to learn about the broader context of Chicago's coal industry. She discovered that the Consolidated Coal Company was part of a larger network of mines that supplied the city with fuel during a period of rapid growth. The miners came from all over the world, drawn by the promise of work and a better life. They faced harsh conditions, low wages, and constant danger, but they also found solidarity in their shared struggles. Margaret came to see Thomas not just as an individual, but as part of a larger story of resilience and sacrifice. She began to appreciate the strength of the community that had supported the miners and their families, and she felt a deep connection to the history of Chicago's working class. This understanding gave her a new perspective on her own life and the legacy she wanted to leave behind. Margaret's quest to uncover Thomas's story did not end with the family gathering. She became a local historian of sorts, dedicating herself to preserving the memory of the Consolidated Coal Company and its miners. She reached out to other families who had lost loved ones in the mines, collecting their stories and photographs. She organized a small exhibit at the community center, displaying the artifacts she had gathered and sharing the history of the coal mining industry in Chicago. The exhibit drew a steady stream of visitors, many of whom were moved by the stories of loss and resilience. Margaret found herself becoming a voice for the miners and their families, advocating for greater recognition of their sacrifices. She worked with local schools to develop educational programs about the history of coal mining, ensuring that the next generation would remember the men who had shaped the city's growth. One day, Margaret received a visit from a young historian named Sarah, who was researching the labor movements of the early 20th century. Sarah was struck by Margaret's passion and the depth of her knowledge. She asked if she could interview Margaret for her thesis, hoping to include her story in her research. Margaret agreed, sharing her experiences and insights with Sarah. She spoke of the challenges she had faced as a miner's wife, the strength she had drawn from her faith, and the hope that had sustained her through the years. Sarah listened with empathy, her eyes filled with admiration. As their conversations continued, Margaret found herself reflecting on the broader impact of Thomas's story. She realized that his life was not just a personal tragedy, but a reflection of the struggles faced by countless families during the industrial era. She saw the parallels between Thomas's experiences and the stories of other miners, the common threads of loss, resilience, and hope. Margaret's collaboration with Sarah led to the publication of an article in a local history journal. The article told the story of Thomas Sullivan and the Consolidated Coal Company, highlighting the sacrifices made by miners and their families. Margaret was proud to see Thomas's story reach a wider audience, knowing that his legacy would continue to inspire others. Through her work, Margaret found a new purpose. She had spent years waiting for Thomas's return, but now she was honoring his memory in a way that transcended her personal loss. She was ensuring that the stories of the miners would not be forgotten, that their sacrifices would be remembered by future generations. Margaret also began to collaborate with local labor organizations, sharing her research and advocating for the preservation of labor history. She attended meetings and events, using her platform to highlight the importance of remembering the struggles of the working class. She found a renewed sense of purpose in her activism, knowing that her efforts could make a difference in the lives of others. Margaret's work became a bridge between the past and the present, connecting the stories of the miners to the ongoing fight for workers' rights and social justice. As Margaret's reputation as a historian grew, She began receiving invitations to speak at events and conferences. She shared Thomas's story with audiences across the country, her words resonating with those who had experienced similar losses. She became a symbol of resilience and hope, a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. One evening, Margaret was invited to speak at a memorial service for the miners of the Consolidated Coal Company. The event was held at the site of the old mine, now a quiet park, with a simple monument to honor the men who had lost their lives. Margaret stood before a crowd of families, friends, and community members, her voice steady but filled with emotion. She spoke of Thomas's courage, his love for his family, and the hope that had sustained her through the years. She shared the stories she had collected, the photographs and letters that bore witness to the lives of the miners. She spoke of the sacrifices made by the families, the strength they had drawn from their faith, and the legacy they had left behind. As Margaret concluded her speech, the crowd rose to their feet, their applause echoing through the park. She felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had honored Thomas's memory and the memory of all the miners who had worked in the darkness beneath the earth. After the memorial, Margaret was approached by a group of young people who had attended the service. They thanked her for sharing her story, telling her that it had inspired them to learn more about their own family histories. Margaret smiled, her heart warmed by their words. She realized that her story was not just about loss, but about the power of memory and the importance of preserving the past. She had spent years waiting for Thomas's return, but now she was ensuring that his legacy would live on in the hearts of others. She had found a new purpose, a new way to honor his memory, and the memory of all the miners who had shaped the city's history. Margaret's speeches continued to draw large audiences, and she became a respected figure in the community. She was invited to participate in documentaries and radio programs, sharing her insights and experiences with a wider audience. Margaret's story became a source of inspiration for others, a reminder of the strength and resilience of the human spirit. She continued to speak out for the rights of workers and the importance of remembering the past, ensuring that the legacy of the miners would never be forgotten. Over the years, Margaret's work also inspired a broader interest in Chicago's labor history. She collaborated with local museums and historical societies, helping to curate exhibits that highlighted the contributions of miners and their families. She worked with educators to develop lesson plans that brought the stories of the working class into classrooms, ensuring that students would learn about the struggles and triumphs of those who came before them. Margaret's advocacy extended beyond the community center. She became involved with state and national organizations dedicated to preserving labor history, sharing her research and experiences at conferences and symposiums. She was recognized for her contributions with awards and honors, but her greatest reward was seeing the impact of her work on others. Margaret's legacy became a beacon for those who sought to honor the past and fight for a better future. She continued to speak out for the rights of workers, using her platform to advocate for safer working conditions and fair wages. She mentored young activists and historians, encouraging them to continue the work of documenting and sharing the stories of the working class. Margaret's story became a source of inspiration for generations to come, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, hope and resilience can endure. Margaret's life continued to be shaped by the legacy of Thomas and the miners of the Consolidated Coal Company. She remained active in the community, dedicating herself to preserving the memory of those who had worked in the mines. She organized annual memorial services, educational programs, and historical exhibits, ensuring that the stories of the miners would not be forgotten. As the years passed, Margaret's family grew, and her grandchildren began to take an interest in their heritage. They listened to her stories with wide eyes, their hearts touched by the tale of a man who had lived through unimaginable hardship. Margaret shared the photographs and letters she had collected, passing down the legacy of Thomas and the miners to the next generation. One day, Margaret received a letter from Sarah, the historian who had interviewed her years before. Sarah wrote to tell Margaret that her research had been published in a national history journal and that Thomas's story had inspired a new generation of historians and activists. Margaret smiled as she read the letter, her heart filled with pride. She realized that her story was not just about loss, but about the enduring power of hope and the importance of memory. She had spent years waiting for Thomas's return, but now she was ensuring that his legacy would live on in the hearts of others. She had found a new purpose, a new way to honor his memory, and the memory of all the miners who had shaped the city's history. Margaret continued to live her life with grace and dignity, her heart filled with the love and hope that had sustained her through the years. She knew that Thomas's story would continue to inspire others, a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. She had waited for Thomas's return, but now she was ensuring that his legacy would live on, a beacon of hope for future generations. Margaret's work also inspired others to get involved in preserving labor history. She mentored young historians and activists, encouraging them to continue the work of documenting and sharing the stories of the working class. Margaret's legacy became a source of inspiration for those who followed in her footsteps, ensuring that the sacrifices of the miners would never be forgotten. She continued to advocate for the rights of workers and the importance of remembering the past, leaving behind a legacy of hope and resilience for future generations. Margaret's efforts helped to raise awareness of the broader social and economic context of coal mining in Chicago. She highlighted the struggles of miners during the industrial era, the impact of labor disputes, and the importance of solidarity among workers. She emphasized the need for safe working conditions and fair wages, drawing parallels between the challenges faced by miners in the past and those faced by workers today. Margaret's work also brought attention to the environmental and social impact of coal mining. She spoke about the environmental degradation caused by mining operations, the displacement of communities, and the long-term consequences of industrialization. She advocated for sustainable practices and the preservation of natural resources, recognizing the importance of balancing economic growth with environmental responsibility. Margaret's legacy extended beyond the preservation of labor history. She became a voice for social justice, using her platform to advocate for the rights of marginalized communities. She supported initiatives that promoted education, healthcare, and economic opportunity for all. Margaret's story became a symbol of hope and resilience, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, individuals can make a difference. Margaret's life was a testament to the enduring power of love, hope, and memory. She had waited for Thomas's return, but now she was ensuring that his legacy would live on, a beacon of hope for future generations. Her story inspired others to honor the past and fight for a better future, leaving behind a legacy of hope and resilience that would endure for years to come. Every family hides secrets, some so dark they should never see the light of day. Here, we open the doors to those shadowed pasts, uncovering hidden crimes, silent pacts, and stories that echo like ghosts through the halls of memory. If you've made it this far, it means you also carry that forbidden curiosity. So don't hesitate. Subscribe to the channel now, turn on the bell, and follow our next revelations. Because every day, new secrets emerge, and only those who dare to face the truth remain to hear them.